Hello and welcome to this video from Spruebox on painting a head using acrylic paints. I'm Rob and I will be taking you through the stages with the head provided and the paints provided and the brushes provided. Now you've been supplied with a plinth and a head, quite a large scale head. It's resin and it is actually, it may or may not surprise you to know that this is Michael Caine. I believe the figure it comes from is representing the character Michael Caine played in Zulu. So if you were to Google that, you'd see a hair colour and what the collar on his uniform would look like. But whether you think it looks like Michael Caine or not, it is a pretty decent sculpt, full of character, and should be quite a lot of fun to paint, and it's got some good features for us to take through to hopefully completion. But first off, you can see it's got a resin plug from its pouring into the mould, and we're going to have to remove that to make it neat. So the idea is that we'll remove that. You could leave it at that, or the idea is that when we finish this, you could display it on the plinth. We can paint this black, put it on here, and you've got a nice little plinth or a head to display what you painted. But to do that, we have to do some preparation, and we'd drill a hole and drill a hole and be able to mount it. But we'll come to that. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to remove this with either a razor saw, good old classic razor saw, or I'm going to use this much finer bladed razor saw from, I can't remember, from JLC in, I believe it's Czechoslovakia, and this is very nice, very good, easy, bit finer to use. So I'll come back when I have done that. Hello and welcome back. Now I have drilled and inserted a length of brass rod into the neck after having removed that plug, and I've drilled a corresponding hole in the plinth. So let's have a look. Now that will serve two purposes. One, it will very nicely sit on there so that when we've finished painting this, it'll be a nice little display piece. You could push it all the way down to the bottom or do it like this. Yeah, you can make it however you want to do it. I'll probably leave a little gap, but that brass rod also serves as a way of holding the figure. But I will just say, you can see here a little circle. That was after I'd cut and sanded down, let's get that in focus, after I'd cut and sanded down the plug, it exposed an air bubble. There's another little one there, and I filled that with super glue. So this has just been stuck in with super glue and then sanded down. That will eventually be painted black for when it's finally on the display plinth. But yes, holding, one of the most important things to remember while painting is you don't want to be holding this with your fingers. Your fingers will be greasy, your fingers could be dirty. You could rub paint off or make it greasy before you are able to get paint on it. So you want to find a way of holding the miniature, be it a figure, be it a head like this. There are several ways we can do this. Some are a bit posher than others, but one that you may see quite a bit is just a good old wine bottle and a cork from a wine bottle. This is you can put the rod in the cork and move you've got something comfortable to hold while you're painting. Disadvantages of wine bottle tops, unless you can find a nice way of holding them, when you put them down, well, that's worked all right, but it's quite narrow and could topple over much more easily. So you could get a bit of blue tack and hold it somewhere secure when you're not touching it. You don't want it to topple. So that's one way. Alternatives to that are demijohn stoppers. If you're going to paint several figures, and it can be useful for a number of things, you can buy from wine shops demijohn corks, which are bigger and are tapered and are therefore much more stable. And so again, drill a little hole, or you can just force it in, and you've got another comfortable way of holding your miniature. So those are the cork route. What I have acquired and find quite useful are a good old pin vise, but ones which have got this flat end. So it's metal, so it's heavy. It's got a flat base, so it will stay flat, and obviously you can stick the brass rod in there, and you've got something comfortable to hold in your hand. What actually works quite well is this can sit in the palm of your hand, in the base of your hand, and you can turn the miniature quite well while you're painting it, quite comfortably without. It's quite a comfortable way of doing it. I've somehow managed to acquire several of these because I might have various parts of various miniatures at various points of painting. But yeah, there are commercial things you can buy specifically for holding figures. I won't show you those, but they are about. But yes, so now we have our cleaned up head and our plinth, and the next thing we will need to do is to prime the head so that we can start painting. I'll come to that later. I should probably add that often with casting you can find a mould line like you would with a plastic kit, and you can find problems with the casting, but this is pretty good. I can't see any seam lines, mould lines, because it was poured in from a single piece. It doesn't. There might be a mould line just down the back there. I can't see it really coming through the rest of the figure there, so I think we're going to be okay just to prime it as it is. But yeah, next time he'll be primed and I'll go through priming options, but at this point in time he's almost ready to go. Hello, this is just a kind of an optional video, intermediate bit, you'll see my camera is struggling to, I don't know why that is doing that. Anyway, if I put my hand behind it, you can see that it's actually grey now because I gave it a coat of grey primer. I'm going to zoom in, and what you'll see now, it's not a full coat of primer. I just did it quite lightly. I did it late at night and I couldn't really see the coverage because it was kind of in a semi-dark. But you'll see the sort of wrinkle on his forehead is quite pronounced, and you'll see that as I've zoomed in, the sculpting on his cheek and chin is just a little bit rough. So when we're putting smooth paint on there, it'll be quite tricky to get a smooth finish because you'll just get that, you'll get some pooling in there of paint the way I'm going to do this. So what I'm going to do, you don't have to do it. It is entirely up to you. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I'm going to give that a little sanding. So, for example, I'm going to be using some sandpaper or wet and dry paper. This is 400. I've got some finer grades, probably a 1200, something like that. I've got a couple of needle files. I'm just going to give it a light sanding to see if I can, how to soften particularly that one on his forehead, because that just will act like a panel line as opposed to a crease. You rarely get a crease like that on a human head, so I'm going to make that change. I won't video it, but I will reprime it and then come back. So like I say, this is optional. You will be able to paint it in the way I'm showing by not doing this, but I'm going to do that. Aha! Hello again. I wasn't going to share how I was doing this, but I ended up using a technique which you may or may not be familiar with. I tend to use it on seam lines on figures, mould lines on figures. I might, or on even armour or anything that's got a seam. But you can, it will also smooth a surface. So scalpel blade, you could use a flat blade, but because of the nature of the surface here, because it's concave and convex as opposed to flat, this type of blade is quite handy, and it's just effectively scraping across the surface. So we can see on this side that I haven't done yet, you can see those rough, I'm zooming right in there, that rough surface, and hopefully if I just start this is a first for me, guys. I'm doing this looking at the camera as opposed to looking at the model. So, but you get the idea. I'm effectively smoothing this surface with my blade, and you can see even before I've primed it that that is now smoother. So I'm just going to go and just take the biggest edges off, hopefully where I think it's worst. I've just spotted a little air hole there, which I should really fill. setting. I'm using the blade almost at 90 degrees. And just taking off that rougher edge. Now you could use this method and technique for just taking any rough areas around the nose. Arguably some of those lines are kind of just like natural creases the sculptor has put into the face, but some are just tools or working finishes that the sculptor has just left in it. I was just going to take it out on those worst areas, which those are the areas we'll end up having some of the biggest shadows and the likes on, or biggest gradations in paint when we get to that painting stage. So yeah, on same aspect regarding those creases. What I've ended up doing there is just with a point of a blade in both directions, and I will go over that bit again with some so that's eased off. Those creases are still there, but they're not as pronounced. They're less like panel lines, which when we're trying to paint those later on, they will be a pain to deal with, because it's just going to flood with paint and we won't have any control. So there you go. Some simple figure cleaning. I mean, this would work on a smaller resin head, it would work on a plastic head, plastic arm, anything like that. That's how you can remove mould seam lines. And I mean, you could argue when you look at some of this, I mean, I'll probably end up that's a resin casting blob there, which I can do the same thing. Yours might not have that. And then you can see here that although I said I couldn't really see any seam lines on it, now it's primed, I can see little marks there from a casting, and indeed two here. So I will end up, you could use a sandpaper or file, or you could easily do what I'm doing here, and that's that'll just mean that when you paint that area, it's not going to look odd. I mean, obviously depends on how well you want to finish it. I make no apologies for being the kind of perfectionist that I am. I don't know if that's, well, it's just me. I do it on vehicles, I'll do it on a figure. I'm effectively making it easier to paint later on by doing this. So preparation can be a bit of a pain in any modelling genre. But hey, James asked me to do this and I'm doing it. So there you go. Hello again. Another unexpected video. Well, I think I finished all the cleaning I'm going to do. However, when I was just removing a bit of material from his chin, I exposed an air bubble. So it's not impossible that you might encounter one of these. So I'm going to have to fill that. Super glue can do it. A 2-part epoxy putty like Milliput would do it. I'm going to use super glue. Yeah, it's going to be something that might take a few minutes, so I shall come back and show you what I've done in a bit. But yeah, that's how an air bubble, you can see it's all glossy inside. Obviously that was the casting block underneath at the base of his neck, and air in the resin when it's poured comes to the surface. However, it got to the surface but didn't quite break it, and my scraping with the scalpel blade exposed it. So that's what it will look like, and I have to do something about it. Primed him again. We'll come to primers in just a minute, but I will now. You can see now his cheek has a much smoother finish on both sides from my gentle scraping. Arguably a little bit rough under his chin still. The hole in the bubble has been filled, and you can see that the creases on his forehead are less pronounced. Maybe still slightly over pronounced, but that's going to be much easier to deal with. But now he is ready to paint for the next stage, which will be coming later. But there we go. And I used Tamiya Fine Surface Primer. A rattle can I only ever prime with cans. I'm primed with airbrushes. For me, life's too short and it's stinky enough anyway. So this is really nice. It clings and sort of to every detail and shrinks nicely so that it captures all the detail. And you can get it quite easily in Hobbycraft and places like that. You can use all sorts of paints, or you can use different things to prime with. Another one that I have used is, Mr. Surfacer. This is in theory, it will be having a filling effect, Mr. Surfacer, but this is another one I use from time to time in black. Citadel, good old Games Workshop, Chaos Black I use quite a bit. It does affect, but black or grey does affect what how your paints will perform, but for the purposes of this video I'm using the grey. And last but not least, good old Halford's matte black spray does the job as well. So lots of different options, but yeah, we are now ready to paint our Michael, and mounted, ready to rock and roll, and we'll see how we go from here. Thank you very much.